"We need to make a child," the Apache woman said, and the cowboy went completely still. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows over the wide, dusty plains. The horizon seemed endless, a sea of golden grasses swaying in the soft breeze. The air was dry and smelled faintly of earth and sage. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a bird calling pierced the quiet, a lonely note against the vastness of the frontier. A single cowboy rode along a narrow trail, the wheels of his small wagon long left behind. His horse, a strong bay with a glossy coat, moved steadily but with a certain weariness, as if sensing the long journey they had shared. The man was tall and lean, with skin darkened by the sun and hands roughened from years of work. His eyes, a sharp green, scanned the landscape constantly, cautious and alert. He had been traveling for days without seeing another soul, moving through a land that belonged as much to the wild as it did to those brave enough to survive in it. The cowboy's name was James, though in most of the small towns he passed he was only known as the Wanderer. He carried few belongings, just a worn leather satchel, a rifle slung across his back, and a small journal where he recorded his thoughts and the occasional sketch of the land he passed. He was a man used to solitude, and yet, even in this quiet place, he felt a restlessness he could not name. Perhaps it was the loneliness, or perhaps it was the constant sense that the land held secrets he had yet to discover. Whatever it was, it made him ride on, chasing the horizon as if it held the answers he could not find elsewhere. As the cowboy rounded a small hill, he spotted a small stream cutting through the plain. Its water shimmered in the fading sunlight, clear and cool, a rare and precious sight in the dry expanse. James guided his horse down the slope, letting it drink deeply while he filled a canteen for himself. The water tasted of minerals and earth, but it was welcome, refreshing him in ways he hadn't realized he needed. He noticed footprints in the soft soil near the water, not of animals, but of humans. They were fresh, a sign that someone had passed through this place not long ago. James's hand instinctively went to the rifle across his back. He had learned long ago that the frontier could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. People were not always friendly, and strangers could bring trouble as easily as they could bring news. He followed the footprints slowly, keeping his senses alert. The trail led him through a grove of low trees, their branches twisted and gnarled by wind and time. Here the air felt cooler and the quiet was deeper, almost as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Then he saw her. She appeared from between the trees like a vision of the land itself, tall, strong, and sure of herself. Her dark hair fell in thick braids down her back, and her eyes, deep and steady, held a wisdom that seemed far older than her years. She wore a simple dress of soft buckskin decorated with small beads and patterns that spoke of her people and her heritage. James froze, not wanting to make any sudden moves. He had encountered many people in his travels, but there was something different about her, a presence that commanded attention without a word. The woman noticed him immediately, her gaze steady and unflinching. She did not move toward him, nor did she back away. She simply watched, as if assessing whether he belonged in this place, whether he could be trusted. James swallowed hard, realizing that for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Most people he met on the frontier were quick to judge, quick to act, but her calm presence unsettled him. It was not fear exactly, but something close to it, a recognition that this encounter might change the course of his journey. Finally, after a long moment, she spoke. Her voice was soft yet firm, carrying across the quiet grove. "You are far from your home," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. James nodded, tipping his hat in respect. "Aye," he replied, I've been riding for many days. Water, food, a place to rest, the usual. He tried to keep his tone casual, though inside he felt a tension he had not felt in years. He had expected caution, maybe even hostility, but not this. Calm authority. She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that hinted at amusement or perhaps curiosity. "This land is not for everyone," she said. "Those who come here must understand it, respect it, or it will test them." James nodded again, thinking of all the hardships he had faced: storms, wild animals, bandits, the harsh sun and cold nights. He had survived, yes, but the land had left its marks on him, and he knew it could easily take everything from him if he was careless. For a time they simply watched each other, the silence between them filled with the sounds of the land. The wind rustled the trees, the stream gurgled quietly, and a distant hawk circled above. James felt an odd sense of peace in the quiet, a rare moment of connection with another person after years of wandering alone. He realized that this encounter, unexpected as it was, might be more important than any he had experienced before. Something about her presence suggested that she had a purpose, a reason for meeting him here, in this place that was wild, untamed, and beautiful in its own harsh way. Finally, she gestured toward the stream. "Sit," she said. "The day is ending, and the night brings cold. Rest before you continue." James hesitated for only a moment before following her instruction. Settling on a smooth rock near the water's edge, he took out a small piece of jerky from his satchel, offering a piece to his horse, who nickered softly in thanks. The woman had already built a small fire, carefully arranging stones around it to keep it contained. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the ground, and the cowboy felt the warmth seep into his bones. He had slept under the stars many times, but there was a comfort in a fire built by someone else, in knowing that for at least this night he would not be entirely alone. As the fire crackled, they began to talk, slowly at first. She asked about his journey, his life, and the hardships he had faced. He answered honestly, speaking of towns left behind, trails crossed, and nights spent alone under the vast sky. In turn, she spoke of the land, her people, and the wisdom passed down through generations. She spoke of survival not as a struggle against nature alone, but as a harmony with it, a respect for the rhythms of the earth and the cycles of life. James listened, fascinated, realizing that her knowledge of the land was deeper than any he had encountered, and that her presence carried both authority and serenity. The evening grew darker, the sky painted in shades of deep blue and purple, stars beginning to twinkle faintly in the vast expanse above. The air grew cooler, and James drew his coat tighter around him, feeling both comforted and challenged by the intensity of the moment. He had expected a simple encounter, perhaps a brief exchange of words before continuing on his journey, but instead, he found himself in the presence of someone who commanded his full attention, whose words made him think and reflect on things he had long ignored. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, a feeling that she understood more about him than he understood about himself. By the time the first stars shimmered above, James knew that this night would be remembered. It was a night of unexpected encounters, of lessons learned not through struggle but through presence, patience, and observation. He realized that the frontier was not only a place of danger, but also a place of discovery, where people and land could teach lessons in the most unexpected ways. And in that moment, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, he understood that this encounter with the Apache woman was only the beginning of a story he could not yet fully imagine. A story that would test him, challenge him, and perhaps change him forever. The cowboy felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He did not know what the coming days would hold, but he sensed that something extraordinary was about to unfold, and as he settled near the fire, watching her move with calm efficiency, he realized that the frontier was not just a place of survival, but a place where lives could intertwine in ways both unexpected and profound. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light on the clearing as the night deepened. The cowboy James had never spent a night like this before. Normally, he slept under the stars with only the cold ground and his horse for company. But tonight, there was someone else, a presence both calming and unsettling. He watched the Apache woman as she moved with quiet confidence, arranging small branches and kindling with practiced skill. She had an air about her that made the land itself seem alive, as if even the wind and the trees acknowledged her presence. James tried to imagine what her life must have been like. He thought of the long trails, the hardships of living in the wild, and the strength it would take to survive in a world often harsh and unforgiving. And yet there was warmth in her eyes, a kind of quiet certainty that suggested she had mastered the ways of the land in ways he could only dream of. She seemed untouchable yet approachable, like a force of nature that could not be tamed but could be respected. After a long silence, she finally spoke. Ah. Her voice was steady, calm, and carried an authority that made James pause. "There are things in life that cannot be rushed," she said. "Choices must be made carefully, and some decisions carry more weight than others." James nodded slowly, unsure if he should respond. He had learned over the years that some words were better left unsaid, but there was something in her tone that invited conversation. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I've made many choices on the trail," he said. "Some good, some... but I've always tried to survive and to do right by the people and places I encounter." The woman nodded, as if expecting nothing less. Then, without warning, she said something that made him freeze. "We need to make a child." James blinked, caught completely off guard. He had been expecting many things on this journey: storms, wild animals, maybe even danger from people. But he had never expected this. His mind froze for a moment, and his body went still. He stared at her, unsure if he had heard correctly. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. The Apache woman did not flinch or lower her gaze. She spoke again, with the same calm certainty. "It is not a demand. It is a need. A need for the future, for life to continue, for strength to survive." James swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He had spent his life in solitude, avoiding attachments, moving from place to place without leaving a trace. And yet, here was a woman speaking of the future in a way that forced him to consider things he had never thought about. He tried to respond, but no words came immediately. His mind raced with questions. Why him? Why now? What did she mean? And yet beneath his surprise, there was something else. A flicker of understanding, of recognition that life sometimes demanded choices bigger than oneself. He had faced danger before, yes, but this was different. This was about life, legacy, and something deeper than mere survival. The woman watched him carefully, noticing the tension in his posture, the hesitation in his movements. She did not push, did not demand, but allowed him the space to process her words. "You are startled," she said quietly, almost with amusement. "I do not expect an answer tonight. I only ask that you think, and that you consider the world beyond yourself." James nodded, finally finding his voice. I've never thought of such things in this way." My life has been about surviving, moving, and staying alive. That's all I've known." The woman's expression softened slightly, and she stepped closer to the fire, letting the warmth touch her face. "Survival is not just about the self," she said. "It is about continuity, about life that stretches beyond a single person, beyond a single season." James looked at her, trying to understand. He had faced storms, bandits, hunger, and cold nights, but he had never faced a challenge like this. He realized that it was not just a question of action, but of belief, of trust, of courage. And for the first time in many years, he felt something stirring inside him, an awareness that life could mean more than what he had known. The fire crackled again, and the shadows danced across their faces. James thought of the endless plains he had crossed, of the sun rising and setting over lonely hills, of nights spent in silence broken only by the sounds of nature. He thought of the lessons he had learned from the land: patience, observation, respect, and he understood that this moment, strange and unexpected as it was, demanded the same qualities: patience, observation, respect. He needed to understand, to think, and to feel before making a choice. For a long time they sat in silence, the night around them deepening. Crickets chirped in the grass, and the wind whispered through the trees. The Apache woman tended the fire quietly, her movements careful and deliberate. James found himself watching her, noticing the grace in her actions, the wisdom in her calm presence. He realized that this was not just a woman asking for something. She was offering him a chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that could outlast both of them, something that carried the weight of the future. Finally, he spoke again. "I need to understand," he said, "not just the words, but the meaning behind them. I need to know why this is important, why it matters, and why you ask me." The woman's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Because you are here," she said simply. "Because you see the land as it is, and because you can carry the weight of choice. Not all who walk this earth can do so. Some are too frightened, some too selfish, some too blind. But you have seen much, and you have survived. That is why you are here." James felt a chill, not from a cold, but from the gravity of her words. He realized that this was no ordinary encounter, no simple meeting by a stream. This was a moment of decision, a test of character, and a challenge to his understanding of life itself. He looked at her more closely, noticing the strength in her posture, the calm in her voice, the wisdom in her eyes. She was not asking for himself alone, but for something that stretched beyond him, beyond the night, beyond the plains. The night grew darker, and the fire burned low, but the intensity between them remained. James felt his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the weight of what was being asked. He thought of the life he had led, of the roads he had traveled, and of the solitude he had cherished. And yet, for the first time, he wondered if there was more to life than survival, more to existence than wandering from one place to another. The Apache woman leaned slightly closer, but not in a way that demanded, only in a way that invited understanding. "A choice like this is never simple," she said. "It is never without responsibility. But it is also a gift, a chance to create, to leave something behind, to be part of life in its fullest sense." James nodded slowly, feeling the truth in her words. He had spent his life avoiding attachments, avoiding responsibility, avoiding the weight of the world. But now, faced with her quiet authority, he felt a stirring he could not ignore. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The night deepened, and the stars shone brighter above the plains. James felt the vastness of the frontier around him. the quiet power of the land, and the intensity of the moment with the woman before him. He realized that this encounter was more than chance, it was fate, or destiny, or perhaps simply the way life moved, when two paths crossed at exactly the right moment. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the sky, James had made a decision. Not a final answer, but a commitment to understanding, to listening, to considering the life and future that the Apache woman spoke of. He knew that the coming days would bring more questions, more challenges, and perhaps more fear. But he also knew that he could not ignore what had begun here, in this quiet clearing, by a fire under the endless sky. As the wind shifted and the stars faded into the light of morning, James felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond himself. He looked at the Apache woman, and she smiled faintly, as if recognizing the change within him. They did not speak, for words were unnecessary. The understanding between them was enough. The future, uncertain and vast as the frontier itself, stretched before them, and together they would face it, one step at a time. The days passed slowly, measured by the rise and fall of the sun and the changing colors of the wide, open plains. James had traveled through countless landscapes in his life, dusty trails, rocky hills, and endless stretches of golden grass, but he had never encountered a place that seemed to hold so many secrets, or a person who made him feel so unsettled and yet so alive. The Apache woman, whose name he had learned was Ayasha, moved through the land with an ease that James could only admire. Every gesture, every glance, spoke of experience and wisdom, and he watched her carefully, trying to learn from her, trying to understand the depth of her connection to this vast and untamed land. Ayasha did not speak often, but when she did, her words carried weight. They spoke not only of survival, but of respect, responsibility, and the delicate balance between life and nature. She showed James how to observe the land, to notice the tracks of animals, the patterns in the grass, and the subtle signs that predicted the coming weather. She explained how each plant, each rock, and each stream held a story, and that understanding those stories was essential to surviving and thriving in this land. James listened closely, learning not just with his eyes but with his heart, realizing that this was a kind of knowledge he had never known. As they traveled together, James began to see Ayasha in a new light. She was not simply a guide or a companion. She was a teacher, a force of nature, and a keeper of wisdom. Her connection to the land seemed almost magical, though she never claimed it was. She moved with purpose, her steps careful yet confident, and James found himself trying to match her pace, trying to prove that he could learn, that he could understand, that he could belong, even if only for a short time in this wild and unforgiving place. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, they made camp near a small grove of trees. The air was cooler here, shaded from the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, and the sounds of the land were gentler. The distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the soft trickle of a hidden stream. Ayasha gathered wood for a fire, and James watched her movements carefully, noticing the skill and precision with which she worked. There was a rhythm to her actions, a quiet strength that James found both humbling and inspiring. They sat by the fire as the first stars appeared, the light flickering across their faces. James had been silent for a long time, thinking about Ayasha's words from days before, about the future, about life, and about the choice she had asked him to consider. He realized that he was beginning to understand her reasoning, though he still struggled with the weight of it. She had asked him to think beyond himself, to see life not just as survival but as a continuous thread that stretched across generations. It was a concept that was new to him, foreign in a way that made his mind race and his heart ache. Ayasha spoke then, breaking the silence. "You have been quiet," she said softly. not accusingly, but with gentle curiosity. James looked into the fire, feeling the warmth on his face and the weight of her gaze. "I am thinking," he said finally, "about what you said,
About the child, about the life that could be.
and what it would mean." He paused, unsure how to continue. "It's not something I've ever considered. My life has always been about the next town, the next trail, the next sunrise. I've never thought about the future in this way." Ayasha nodded slowly. "Few people do," she said. "It is not an easy thing to think about, especially when life is hard and survival is uncertain. But life is not just about the next sunrise. It is about the sunrises that will come long after we are gone, about the people who will live because we lived, about the choices we make, and the legacy we leave behind." Her voice was calm, steady, and full of conviction, and James felt himself drawn to her words, feeling the truth in them even if he did not yet fully understand it. The night deepened, and the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. James found himself opening up in ways he rarely did. He spoke of his travels, the people he had met, the dangers he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. Ayasha listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes remaining silent, allowing him the space to share and to reflect. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, and that understanding felt heavier, more profound than anything James had encountered before. Over the next several days, they continued their journey together. They hunted small game, gathered food, and learned to move through the land in harmony with its rhythms. James began to notice subtle changes in himself, patience he had never had before, a sharper awareness of the world around him, and a growing sense of responsibility, not just for his own survival, but for the life that might come from the choices he made. He realized that Ayasha was teaching him more than survival. She was teaching him how to see life as a whole, how to respect it, and how to take part in it fully. One morning, as the sun rose in a brilliant burst of orange and gold, they stopped near a quiet stream. Ayasha knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking slowly, savoring its coolness. James watched her, noticing the care with which she treated even the smallest things, the way she observed the ripples, the way she listened to the wind. "The land gives," she said quietly, looking up at him. "But it also asks. It asks that we respect it, that we understand it, and that we take responsibility for the life we touch." James nodded, understanding more clearly than ever before why she had said what she had. She was not speaking simply of survival or of a child in the literal sense. She was speaking of life, of responsibility, and of the continuation of something greater than themselves. Her words resonated deeply, and he realized that he was beginning to trust her, not just as a guide, but as someone whose wisdom and understanding could shape his own view of the world. By the end of that day, James felt a sense of connection he had never experienced before. He and Ayasha worked together to set up a small camp, gathering firewood, preparing food, and observing the land around them. There was a quiet companionship in their shared labor, a rhythm that made the days pass quickly even in the vast empty plains. And in that rhythm, James felt a growing respect, a trust, and a recognition of the wisdom Ayasha carried with her. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ayasha spoke again of the future, of life beyond themselves, and of the choices that defined who they were. "The child," she said softly, "is more than a life. It is a bridge, a promise, a continuation. It is not to be taken lightly, nor is it to be feared. It is a chance to create, to give, and to connect with something larger than ourselves." James listened, feeling the truth in her words settle deep within him. He realized that he could no longer see life as he once had, not just a series of trails and towns, but as a web of connections, responsibilities, and legacies that stretched far beyond the horizon. As the night grew darker, James looked at Ayesha with newfound understanding. He no longer felt the shock and hesitation he had felt when she first spoke of the child. Instead, he felt a quiet respect, a growing curiosity, and a willingness to consider the path she was asking him to take. He understood that trust was not given lightly, that responsibility was not a burden but a gift, and that life was richer and more complex than he had ever imagined. In the days that followed, James and Ayesha continued their journey, moving through the plains, learning from the land, and learning from each other. The trust between them grew, built on shared experiences, quiet conversations, and the understanding that some lessons could only be learned in the presence of another. James began to see the world through her eyes, noticing the subtle patterns, the quiet beauty, and the deep interconnectedness of life. And with that understanding came a readiness to face the choices and responsibilities that life would present, no matter how challenging or unexpected. By the time they reached a small hill overlooking the vast plains, James felt a sense of calm he had never known. He looked at Ayesha, standing tall and strong, and realized that the journey they had begun together was not just about survival, but about life, trust, and understanding. He felt ready, not fully perhaps, but ready to face what was to come, to learn, and to grow alongside her. The future, uncertain and vast as the horizon itself, stretched before them, and for the first time, James felt that he was not alone in facing it. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the horizon in soft shades of gold and pink. James stirred from a restless sleep, the wind brushing against his face as he stepped outside the small camp they had made. Ayesha was already awake, moving quietly among the trees, gathering herbs and inspecting the small animals' tracks in the soft earth. The calm certainty in her movements was a reminder to James of how much he had learned in just a few days. He had come to admire her strength, her wisdom, and the quiet determination that seemed to guide every action she took. James felt a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety as he joined her. Today, he knew, would not be just another day of traveling or observing the land. Something deeper was stirring inside him, a sense that he had reached a moment of decision, a point where the lessons he had learned, the trust he had built, and the respect he felt for Ayesha would have to be tested in a meaningful way. He could no longer ignore the question she had posed to him, the choice she had asked him to consider. They walked together toward a small rise overlooking the plains. The wind swept across the tall grasses, carrying with it the scent of earth and wildflowers. James watched the horizon, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. He had always been a man of action, quick to react to danger or opportunity. But this was different. This was not a matter of survival against the elements or a sudden threat. This was a matter of heart, of responsibility, and of life itself. Ayesha stopped and turned to him, her eyes steady and calm. "You have been thinking," she said softly, as if she could read his thoughts. James nodded, finding it difficult to speak. Words felt heavy, laden with the weight of the choice before him. He had thought about his life, his freedom, his solitude, and the unknown future. And yet, beneath all of that, he felt something stirring that he had never felt before, a sense of purpose that went beyond himself, beyond the trails he had traveled, beyond the sunrise and sunset that had marked his lonely existence for so many years. "I have been thinking," he said finally, his voice low but steady, "about what you asked me, about the life we could bring into this world, about responsibility, about trust, and about what it truly means to care for someone beyond yourself." Ayesha's expression softened, but she did not speak immediately. She waited, giving him the space to continue, knowing that this was his moment, his decision to make. James took a deep breath, looking out over the plains, feeling the wind sweep over him like a reminder of the vastness and unpredictability of life. "I have always been alone," he said. "I have moved from one place to another, surviving, avoiding attachments, avoiding responsibility. But I've come to understand that life is more than survival. Life is about connection, about trust, and about the choices we make for the future, even when they are difficult." Ayasha nodded, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "And do you understand what your choice means?" she asked. "Not just for yourself, but for the land, for life, and for the future." James met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. He understood that this was not a simple choice, and it never would be. It was a commitment, a promise, and a responsibility that could not be taken lightly. And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, he felt ready. "I understand," he said finally. "I may not know everything, and I may not be perfect, but I am ready to try. I am ready to trust, to care, and to take part in something greater than myself. I am ready to face the responsibility and the challenge, knowing that life is bigger than one person." Ayasha's face broke into a small, satisfied smile, and James felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace and resolve that he had never known. For the rest of the day they moved together through the plains, gathering food, observing the land, and sharing stories of the past. James found himself speaking more freely than he ever had, recounting memories of childhood, of towns he had visited, of the hardships and triumphs of his life. Ayasha listened quietly, offering guidance and insight, but never judgment. Her presence was steady, grounding, and comforting. James realized that trust was not simply given, it was built through shared experiences, honesty, and understanding. As evening approached, they found a quiet spot near a small grove of trees to make camp. The fire crackled softly, and the air grew cooler, filled with the scent of pine and earth. James sat quietly, watching Ayasha move with ease and purpose, gathering firewood and preparing food. He felt a sense of connection that went beyond words, a recognition that their lives were now intertwined in a meaningful way. He understood that this was not about obligation or duty alone, but about trust, understanding, and the willingness to embrace life fully. When the fire burned low, James spoke again. "Ayasha, I want you to know something," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have made my choice. I will honor what you have asked, and I will face the responsibility that comes with it. I know it will not be easy, and I know I have much to learn, but I am ready to try, to trust, to care, to be part of this with you." Ayasha looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flames of the fire and the sincerity in his words. "Your decision is not just for you," she said softly. "It is for life itself, for continuity, for the hope that what we do today will matter tomorrow. You have chosen wisely, and that is all anyone can do. Choose wisely, act with respect, and face the future with courage."
James felt a sense of relief and determination wash over him.
He realized that life was no longer just about moving from one place to another, surviving from day to day. Life was about connection, about trust, about choices that carried weight and meaning. He understood that Ayasha's request was not simply about the creation of life in a literal sense, but about partnership, shared responsibility, and the willingness to embrace a future beyond himself. That night, as they sat by the fire, James and Ayasha spoke of plans for the coming days, of how they would travel together, and how they would continue to learn from the land. They shared stories of their past, hopes for the future, and reflections on the lessons they had learned. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and the understanding that life was richer when shared with someone who understood its weight and beauty. James realized that he had changed in ways he could not have anticipated. The journey that had begun as a simple travel across the plains had transformed into a journey of the heart and mind, teaching him lessons about responsibility, trust, and the value of life itself. He understood that the choice he had made was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one that would require courage, patience, and commitment. As the fire burned low and the stars appeared in the sky, James felt a quiet sense of peace. He looked at Ayesha, seeing the strength, wisdom, and serenity in her presence. He realized that together they could face whatever the future held. He was no longer alone, and he understood that life's greatest challenges were also its greatest opportunities. In the days that followed, James and Ayesha moved through the plains with a sense of purpose. They worked together, learned from one another, and deepened the trust and understanding that had grown between them. James found that the weight of responsibility, once daunting, became a source of strength and inspiration. He understood that life was not just about survival, but about care, connection, and the choices that defined who they were. By the time they reached a small rise overlooking the vast plains, James felt ready for whatever lay ahead. He had made his choice, embraced his responsibility, and accepted the challenge of life beyond himself. He looked at Ayesha, and she met his gaze with a quiet smile, knowing that the path they were on was not simple, but that it was meaningful and true. James knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, surprises, and lessons yet to be learned. But for the first time, he felt ready, not just to survive, but to live fully, to care, and to embrace the responsibilities that came with life. Trust and connection. The horizon stretched before them, vast and open, and together they would face it, step by step, with courage and hope. The sun was high over the plains, shining brightly on the golden grasses that stretched endlessly in every direction. The wind carried the scents of wildflowers and the soft earth beneath their feet. James rode alongside Ayesha, feeling the rhythm of the land and the quiet companionship that had grown between them over the past days. It was not just the land that felt alive now, but life itself, the connections, the choices, and the possibilities that stretched out before them like the open horizon. Since making his choice, James had felt a change within himself that he could not fully describe. It was not a sudden transformation, but a quiet, steady growth that filled him with a sense of purpose. He had learned patience, respect, and understanding in ways he had never imagined. The lessons Ayesha had taught him about the land, survival, and life were no longer abstract. They had become part of him, shaping how he moved, spoke, and thought. And through it all, their bond had deepened, a trust built slowly and carefully through shared experience, conversation, and mutual respect. Ayesha moved with her usual grace, scanning the landscape for signs of water, shelter, and safe paths through the plains. James had learned to observe as she did, noticing the smallest details, the way the wind bent the grass, the patterns of animal tracks, the subtle changes in the sky that hinted at weather to come. He realized that survival was no longer just about himself, but about partnership, trust, and understanding the world as a whole. He had come to value Ayesha's wisdom not just for its practical use, but for the way it expanded his own view of life. By mid-afternoon, they came upon a small clearing surrounded by trees, with a stream that shimmered in the sunlight. Ayesha motioned for James to stop, and they dismounted from their horses. The air was cool and refreshing near the water, a welcome change from the dry plains. They tended to their animals, letting them drink and graze while Ayesha gathered herbs and checked the surrounding area for safety. James watched her carefully, noticing how every movement was deliberate, thoughtful, and purposeful. He realized that this calm certainty, this connection to the land, was something he wanted to carry with him always. As they sat by the stream, Ayasha spoke quietly, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "The land gives, but it also teaches," she said. "Those who listen, who observe, who respect it, will find guidance. Life is the same. It gives, it challenges, and it teaches those who are willing to learn." James nodded, thinking of how much he had learned in just a short time. Lessons not only about the land, but about trust, responsibility, and connection. It is not just about surviving or about one choice alone. It is about how we live, how we care, and how we shape the future. You have shown me that life is more than just moving from place to place. It is about creating, about leaving a mark, about being part of something larger than ourselves. Ayasha smiled faintly, as if recognizing the truth in his words. "And do you feel ready for what comes next?" she asked gently. James looked out at the horizon, feeling the vastness of the world and the weight of their shared journey. "I am," he said. "I may not know everything, and I may make mistakes, but I am ready to move forward, to care, to be responsible, to trust you and to learn from you." Ayasha's smile widened slightly, and James felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet sense of hope and determination. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the evening, gathering firewood and securing the area around the clearing. The stream provided fresh water, and James began to notice small details that he had once overlooked: the chirping of birds hidden in the trees, the movement of fish in the water, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Life, he realized, was all around him, waiting to be noticed, understood, and cherished. As night fell, they built a small fire near the edge of the clearing. The flames flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the ground and illuminating their faces. James and Ayasha sat close, sharing food and quiet conversation. They spoke of the past, of journeys taken, and of lessons learned. They also spoke of the future, of possibilities that stretched far beyond the plains, beyond the trails they had traveled, and beyond their own understanding. "I have thought a lot about the child," Ayasha said softly, her gaze fixed on the fire. "Not just about life itself, but about what it means to create, to care, and to leave something lasting. Life is fragile, but it is also strong when nurtured with love and understanding." James nodded, feeling the depth of her words. He understood that the choice she had asked him to consider was not a simple one, nor was it about him alone. It was about life, trust, and the future, and he felt honored to be part of it. He reached out and placed a hand over hers, feeling the warmth and strength in her touch. "I promise," he said quietly, "that I will do my best, that I will care, that I will learn, and that I will face the future with courage. I will not take this lightly, and I will not turn away from the responsibility you have entrusted to me." Ayasha's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging not just his words, but the sincerity behind them. The night grew deeper, and the stars appeared, twinkling brightly against the dark canvas of the sky. James felt a sense of peace he had never known, a quiet joy in the connection they shared and the journey they had undertaken together. He realized that life was not simply about survival or movement, but about trust, understanding, and the bonds formed through shared experience. The plains around them seemed alive with possibility, and he understood that this moment, simple and quiet as it was, carried the promise of a future filled with meaning and hope. Over the following days, James and Ayasha continued their journey, moving carefully through the plains, learning from the land and from each other. They encountered the challenges of nature, storms, uneven terrain, and the occasional wild animal, but they faced them together, their partnership strengthened by trust and respect. James noticed how much he had changed. He was no longer the solitary wanderer who moved from town to town. He had learned to care, to observe, to trust, and to take responsibility for something beyond himself. Ayasha taught him more than survival skills. She taught him how to notice the beauty in small things, the way sunlight fell on the grass, the gentle sound of the stream, the patterns of bird flight in the sky. James began to see life as she did, full of rhythm, meaning, and subtle lessons waiting to be learned. He realized that every choice, every step, every word had weight and consequence, and in that understanding he found courage and clarity. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and purple, they reached a small hill overlooking a valley filled with wild flowers. James dismounted and stood beside Ayasha, feeling the soft breeze on his face. The sight before them was breathtaking, a reminder of the beauty and fragility of life, and the importance of every choice that shaped it. He felt a quiet determination, knowing that the path ahead would not always be easy, but that it was worth taking. Ayasha looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "The future is uncertain," she said, "but it is ours to shape. Life will not wait, and it will not bend for us. We must move forward with courage, trust, and care, and we will face it together." James nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He knew that the journey was far from over, but he also knew that they were ready to face the unknown, ready to nurture life, and ready to embrace the responsibility and joy that came with it. That night, as they sat by the fire, James felt a profound sense of connection to Ayasha, to the land, and to life itself. He understood that the choice he had made was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges, growth, and hope. He realized that the plains, vast and untamed as they were, had taught him lessons that would stay with him forever: patience, observation, respect, trust, and the courage to face life fully. The days turned into weeks, and James and Ayasha continued to travel together. They shared laughter and stories, moments of quiet reflection, and the small joys of life in the wild. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the understanding that life was richer when lived together. James felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, a quiet happiness rooted in trust, connection, and the knowledge that he was part of something larger than himself. And as the sun rose over the plains each morning, casting its golden light over the grasses and hills, James knew that he had found a new purpose. The journey that had begun as a solitary ride across the wild frontier had transformed into a journey of the heart, mind, and spirit. He had learned that life was not simply about survival, but about care, connection, and the choices that shape the future. Together, James and Ayasha faced the unknown with courage, trust, and hope. They embraced the challenges and joys of life, understanding that each day was a gift, each choice a responsibility, and each moment an opportunity to shape the world in small but meaningful ways. The plains stretched endlessly before them, filled with possibilities, and they moved forward side by side, ready to meet whatever came next with strength, wisdom, and heart.